I want to welcome you to this reading workshop. And again, this is just an informational session. So keep in mind that there are no required activities that we're going to do, but just in case you're interested, at the end of the presentation, I will show you some things that I've put together and put in our Google Classroom. So the idea here is just to kind of give you an overview of the TOEFL reading section and to give you a basic idea as to what kind of questions and what the content is. So that's really what we're here about this morning, okay? So we will do a quick overview of the TOEFL reading, so what it includes. We'll talk a little bit about how academic reading is organized. So again, if you've gone to university in your own country, you will probably see a lot of similarities when it comes to organizing information. So that's an advantage that we have as adults. So remember, the TOEFL is usually for high school students. So of course, one advantage for high school students who are graduating is that most of this information might be more fresh, in their minds. We're adults. Maybe it's been a long time since you've read any, biology or any geography or anything like that. But still, we have some experience, and I think that can help us on this test. We'll look at the different types of questions that they have on the TOEFL. So again, there are generally 10 different types of questions that they can ask you on the test. Now, what we're going to be doing today is at least kind of looking a little bit at a sample reading that ETS, which is the Educational Testing Service, has provided for us to use as kind of a way to see, well, what does a reading section on the TOEFL look like? We'll also talk a little bit about some different ways to approach the reading, and that's talking about different ways of looking at text. So if you notice, we're going to be talking about skimming, scanning, and then of course talking about what reading means. What does that mean, reading? So we'll talk about that. And then of course we'll look at some signal words, because as we mentioned in the writing workshop, signals are very important. They really can help us understand how information is organized. We'll finish by talking about some hints and some tips, and then finally discussing how we can improve our reading skills, especially for a test like the TOEFL, okay? All right, now on the TOEFL itself, let's talk about the reading section. Generally, there are 3 to 4 passages, so 3 to 4 texts that you will have to read, and sometimes there may even be another one, like what we call an experiment or like a test reading. The problem is we don't always know which one it is. So in this case, it really will just depend on you, your time taking the test. Now, when it comes to the passages themselves, if you notice, you've got about 60 to 80 minutes total for this section of the test, which means you have about 20 minutes per passage. Now you might say, well, 20 minutes, that sounds pretty good, right? Well, the problem is that is to read and to answer the questions. So as you can see, that's when it becomes a lot more difficult. Now, generally with each passage, there are 12 to 14 questions, and usually the final question is what we call a read to learn question. Now, this morning we're going to look at some of the question types, and we're actually going to look at a sample reading and some sample questions. But again, the idea here is I don't have any expectation that you necessarily are going to do any activities. So of course, I'm going to post this information in the Google Classroom just in case you are interested, though, if you want to try it. Okay. Now, first off, let's talk about how academic text is organized. Now, remember, the readings you're going to see on the TOEFL. The TOEFL is a test of your understanding of academic English. So that's the language that we see at the university level. So, for example, on the test, you're going to see many different kinds of readings. So, for example, we have social sciences. So, social sciences would include things like sociology, psychology. We have what are kind of referred to as the hard sciences, which means, a little more, statistics, numbers. So for example, biology, geology. Now, again, you don't have to be an expert in these things. So I just want to make sure you understand, you don't have to be a biologist to take the test. You also see readings about history. And you also see what are generally referred to as arts and humanities. Now, I think most students usually prefer the arts and humanities because they think they're easier to read. But the truth is, as you will see in just a moment, any of the readings on the test are going to be a challenge. They're going to be a challenge for us. Now, what I want us to think about here first this morning is how do we organize reading? How do we organize this information? So each type of reading, so for example, a sociology text is probably going to be organized differently from a biology text. So for example, when we read things in history, we often use what's called a chronological organization. Now, chronological means things that are organized by time. Now, not always is it going to be this happened first and this happened next, but usually we will see time measurements like in this year and this year. So that usually is something we see more in a history textbook. We would probably not see that so much in a psychology textbook, for example. Okay. Now, guys, here's our first chance to help me out, okay? So let's think about how would these kinds of things be organized. So we can use our microphones if we like, or if you want to use the chat box. Let's think about these three different areas: biology, sociology, and humanities. So let's start with biology. How do you think we're going to organize information in a text about biology, about the study of plants and the study of human life? What do you think? Does anybody have any ideas? How do you think we're going to organize that information? What do you think?
Mm.
What do you think, Rena? Are we going to use dates and time for biology?
Yeah, and born time. If organize mean how to know this is biology or not.
Well, for example, when we see a history text, we usually see dates, right? You know, like 1824 or 17 or 2000, we see dates in a history textbook. What do you think we might see in a biology textbook? What kind of organization do you think we're going to see?
Oh, place.
Possibly. Okay. So we might see locations. Okay.
Locations.
So for example, maybe if we're thinking about studying life, like animal life, we might see words about like what we might call animal habitats, right? So again, where do animals live? Okay. All right. How else do you think we might organize biology? So for example, biology often talks about process, right? So for example, if you think about the life of plants, right? Do you guys have any plants at home? Do you like to keep plants?
Yes.
Okay, now Rena, are you good at keeping plants alive?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's good. I usually kill all of my plants. But usually plants have a process, right? For example, you take the seed, you put it into the ground, right? And then things grow. So, for example, we might see things like a process. How do things grow, right? So, yeah, so biology might use a lot of words and ideas referring to where animals might live or how plants, what kind of environments, right? So we might see information about environments, okay? Okay. All right, let's think about sociology. Now, sociology is often thinking about, the human mind or human behavior. What kinds of things do you think we might see in a sociology text when we're studying about human behavior? What do you think? Anybody have any ideas?
News.
Okay, possibly. So, for example, we might see like developments of human life, like things that happen. Okay. All right, so yeah, we might see, for example, events might happen, sure. Okay, what other ways do you think we would organize information? What do you think, Rena? Any other ideas?
Data.
Aha, there we go. Yeah, so even though sociology is usually thought of as kind of a soft science, but we do use data and statistics, right? In fact, we could even add that to our discussion of biology. Biology often uses data. Oops, sorry guys. Don't know what happened there. Let me go back. Yeah, so let's go back here for a moment. There we go. Okay, so yeah, we could use data and statistics. Yeah, so for a lot of these we might. Okay. All right. And again, when we think about sociology, we also think about issues of the human, like issues of human characteristics. So as we said before, we might see information about human life, how human life might be organized in society. So again, we might think about, often we use ideas and concepts to describe, you know, certain situations or certain psychological things. I can't seem to get this to work there. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, let's finish with humanities. Now you might say, well, Mr. John, what are humanities? Well, for example, we might think about art. Art or music would be an example. Literature would be an example of art of the humanities. So what do you think there, guys? How do we organize information when we write about art or when we write about music or literature? What do you think? What are some ways we organize this information?
Oh, it's difficult. Humanities.
Well, Rena, which do you prefer? You're a math teacher, right?
Yeah.
So do you prefer numbers and data and statistics?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So oftentimes we have these kind of opposites, right? People who like
Mhm.
art, you know, are usually different from people who like the sciences.
Yeah.
But for example, like maybe in music or art, we might see some dates, right? We might see like the life of the person who wrote this music or wrote this literature. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we might see some ideas and concepts, right? Any other things we might see in these areas?
Or category, music category.
Yeah, so for example, we might use this word here, Rena. This is a word we often use in this concept called genre. Yeah. So genres often talk about categories. Yeah. So for example, is this, if maybe like the Impressionists. Do we know the Impressionists painters? Maybe, for example, maybe you've seen them at the museum.
Impressionist. Picasso.
Yeah, well, you're close. Yeah, Picasso would actually be a little bit later than the Impressionists. But, you know, you've probably seen lots of paintings by Impressionists, like Monet, for example. These are usually kind of the more popular ones. Maybe even Van Gogh, you know, different artists. So, yeah, so we might see a mixture of things, right? Dates and ideas and concepts and so on. So, so I wanted to have this little discussion because again, what we need to recognize is when we're reading about these different areas. So again, Rena mentioned numbers and statistics. You know, those are the things we see more in the sciences. Things more like the humanities. You know, these kinds of things are not going to have as many of those kinds of things. They're not going to have numbers and statistics. We're going to see ideas when we're talking about things. So in just a moment, when we look at our reading, we can think a little bit about how do we think this information is organized, okay? All right, so I'm going to clear the screen. And let's go ahead and take a look. Now, again, the TOEFL has lots of kind of helpful preparation material, but we're going to look at a reading that I've used, you know, many times throughout a lot of my presentations. And this is one that the TOEFL has really liked to use as a sample reading for everybody. So the title of this is called The Rise of Teotihuacan. What we're going to do is just focus on the introduction. Okay, so again, if you remember when we were talking about the writing workshop, the introduction really helps us kind of understand the universe of the text. What are we reading about? Okay, now what I want you to do, so Rena, you and Sunny, I want you to think about it. When we look at this first paragraph, what kind of reading is it? What subject do you think it's going to be? Okay, so I'm going to read this first paragraph. Okay, can everyone see this on the screen? Can everyone see it pretty well?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, Sunny, can you see it?
Oh, yes, very good.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to read this this first paragraph. You guys just listen, okay? All right, here we go. The city of Teotihuacan, which lay about 50 kilometers northeast of modern-day Mexico City, began its growth by 200 to 100 BC. At its height, between about AD 150 and 700, it probably had a population of more than 125,000 people and covered at least 20 square kilometers. It had over 2,000 apartment complexes, a great market, a large number of industrial workshops, an administrative center, a number of massive religious edifices, and a regular grid pattern of streets and buildings. Clearly, much planning and central control were involved in the expansion and ordering of this great metropolis. Moreover, the city had economic and perhaps religious contacts with most parts of Mesoamerica, modern Central America, and Mexico. Okay, now, before we kind of talk a little bit about what we're reading, what kind of reading is this? What do you think? What category? So Rena mentioned category before. How would you describe this? Rena, what do you think?
This is places, so humanities.
Okay, well, I noticed some dates though. So maybe it might be the humanities, but I do notice some dates. Do you see some dates in this text? What dates do we see?
No. Oh, 200 to 100 BC.
Yeah, Rena, what does that BC mean? Do you know?
BC, before C.
Okay, Sunny, do you know this one?
I know. Like before the now is 2020. So this is before the how to say, I don't know.
Well,
Century. Century.
You're close. Sonny, I know you like to read the Bible, so what famous person is in the Bible here?
Before the creation.
Oh, you're so close.
Oh, Christ.
Christ, yeah.
Christ, oh.
So, for example, I was mentioning Sonny here, you know, we think of Jesus. Yeah, no, so BC means before Christ, yeah. Now, what's interesting, guys, is most universities today don't use the letters BC. And so many people think of the time period BC as kind of old-fashioned, maybe focusing too much on just a religious point of reference. But we've used the letters BC for a very long time. Today, if you're reading a history text or a text that uses dates, in this case, you might see a newer designation called BCE, which basically means before the Common Era. But again, most of the older texts that you might see, older books, would use BC. Okay, so in this case, 200 to 100 BC. Now, how many years ago do you think that is? 200 to 100. So Sonny mentioned this is the year 2020. So what do you think?
400.
Yeah, so it's a long time, a long time ago. And no, I was not born. I was not alive during that time. So in this case, yeah, BC basically means before we think of the year zero, right? Now, again, I know you guys are coming from different kind of calendars and different time periods, but you know, here in the Western sort of world, we use that the year zero as basically kind of the general idea that Jesus was born in the year zero, which of course is really actually not true, but we've used that historically. Now, what about AD? What do you think AD means?
After.
It's a confusing one. Yeah, so Sunny is correct, but the actual words are Italian. So it's actually Anno Domini, which basically means the year of Jesus. Yeah, so Domini means Christ. in Italian. So in this case, that's what AD means. So you're correct. It's after Christ. Yeah. So we have BC and AD. So I know that sounds very confusing, right? Okay, now, so Rena, let me come back to you for just a moment. So now you see we have dates, and this is a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think any of us were here in 700, were we? Probably not. Okay, so I see some dates, right? So what do you think, Rena? Could this be a history article?
Yeah, history article.
Possibly, yeah. In fact, I think what we're going to notice is what kind of history is it? Well, if you notice the title, Teotihuacan, and in fact, if you notice, look carefully at the first sentence again. It says, the city of Teotihuacan, which lay, now let's see if we can remember, lay. What is the original word here? Anybody know?
Lie?
Yeah, it's the past tense of lie. So Rena, here's a question. Does Teotihuacan still exist?
I think no.
Aha, good answer. Yeah, because if you notice, look at the dates. It started probably before 200 BC. We don't know, but it looks like it probably was around at least until 700 AD. So that's still a long time ago. Okay, so now we notice that Teotihuacan was located near Mexico City, what we consider Mexico City today. So in some ways, this looks like a history article. It looks like we're going to read about the history, but maybe not of a specific person, but maybe the history of a specific city. Now, as we continue reading, just to kind of go back through the introduction one more time, I'm going to underline a few things, and I want you to think about, okay, well, it looks like a history article, but it seems to be talking about kind of a place. I see, for example, that it had a population of 125,000 people, right? It had 2,000 apartment complexes. Now, I don't think they had internet or satellite. So we have markets. I see a great market. Okay. What other places, what other things do you see in the text that were part of this city? What other things did they mention? What do you see? So we have a market, we have apartments. What else?
Administrative center.
Okay, so maybe like a city building, for example. You know, today we get driver's licenses. So maybe, of course, I don't think they had driver's licenses in 700 AD, right? Okay. Sonny, what else? What other places do you see? So we have administrative center, a market. What else?
Workshop.
Okay, so workshops. Yeah. So maybe people working in these places. So again, there are no factories, right? There are no big factories in this time period. So people working maybe small places. Okay. I see religious edifices. Now maybe we don't know the word edifice, but what does that word religious mean?
What I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sunny, what do you think? Is this like a church maybe?
I think it's church.
Okay, so maybe they had churches back then. Yeah, and we see that they had some sort of organization. In fact, it says they had streets and buildings, and they had much planning and control. So it sounds like basically this is maybe an example of one of the first kind of organized cities that we might see here in in Central America. Now, of course, if you notice, they mention the word Mesoamerica. Have you heard those words? Have you heard that word before? Mesoamerica?
No.
Yeah,
This
yeah, it's kind of what's funny is it's kind of an old-fashioned word. And in fact, I know when I was in school, we generally only referred to Mesoamerica in talking about this particular time period, this particular history. So what I notice here is it seems like we're going to learn more about the history of this city. So in some ways, yes, we might consider this to be a history article. Okay. Now, we don't have time necessarily to look at the entire article, but we are going to kind of go back and reference a few things here in just a moment. But what I want you to notice is how much time and attention we paid to the introduction. That's going to be important here when we talk about thinking about taking the test. The introduction can really help you in understanding what the article is going to be about. Now, guys, I'm looking at the clock. We probably spent 5, maybe more minutes talking about the introduction. Unfortunately, on the test, you don't have that much time. But I'm trying to show you something interesting. If you really want to save time, one way you can do that is to pay attention to the introduction. The introduction can help you a lot in thinking about what the reading is going to be about. Okay? Now, we've talked a lot about some of these words. Now, there are probably some words here that in the text you don't know. And of course, as we continue to read, you're probably going to see a lot more words you don't know. And that's because the level of this test, that's something we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Okay, now we're going to come back to the reading, but I'm going to clear the screen for just a moment. And I want to go back to the presentation. And again, we'll come back to the reading here in just a moment. So, but as I mentioned before, very important, I think, for everyone who's interested in taking the test, and of course, just in generally improving our English, you have to improve your vocabulary. So I think a lot of students think when they sit down to read the TOEFL or take the TOEFL that, they'll just answer questions, look at multiple choice answers and then kind of guess. But actually, here's my opinion. I think the TOEFL test is kind of a secret vocabulary test, which means the most important thing I think for everybody who's taking the test is you must improve your vocabulary. Now, guys, already from what you can see in the introduction, from the sample reading we've looked at so far, the level of the vocabulary on the TOEFL is quite difficult. Certainly, right now, it's much higher than what we're doing in our classes. And that's because right now, most of us are in the sort of high intermediate level. But the truth is, if we want to be able to take a test like the TOEFL, you almost have to be reading at what we call a level 12, which basically would be like the equivalent of a high school senior or a freshman at the university level. So keep in mind, the TOEFL is preparing you for university study. So already you can see there's a huge, huge difference in the level of reading and the level of vocabulary. So what I'm here just again to give you information about is the biggest reason for this difficulty is, of course, the vocabulary. Now, what I'd like to do is take just a moment, and I think everybody here would really benefit from this, is to think about how can we improve that vocabulary. Well, of course, taking English classes is a good start. In fact, in earlier in the year when we were offering some advanced classes, I'd say that some of the vocabulary we were reading was getting very close to this level 12, getting very close to that sort of high level reading. But it wasn't easy, and a lot of students will tell you it took a lot of work. But let's take a moment and look at what kind of vocabulary we probably need to think about studying. So what we're going to talk about here for just a moment is what we refer to as the difference between academic vocabulary and technical vocabulary. Now, I'd like for you guys to help me out with this particular slide. So, Rena, could you read this academic vocabulary explanation here for us? Could you read that for us, please?
Okay. Academic vocabulary is what we think of as the language of school. These are words that we often see in multiple subjects in school, but they may not necessarily be words we use every day.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, for example, in the reading, there are many college-level academic words that you may not see or use in everyday speech.
Okay, now guys, I'm going to go ahead and just highlight a few here on the right side. These are some words that you could see in the text. So I'm going to bring them up here on the right side of the screen. So for example, significance. Now you just think for just a moment, do these words look familiar to you? Okay, so significance, expansion, ingenuity, thriving, circumstantially implicated, and eliminated. Now look at these 6 words. And again, there are many, many more in the reading. Do any of these words look familiar to you? Have you seen them somewhere before? If you've seen some of the words, that's good. Do any of these words at least look familiar? Have you seen any of these words before?
No.
Okay, so Sunny,
No.
there, yeah, so you can see the challenge, right? Yeah, I mean, the level of reading that you're going to see on the TOEFL is very difficult. It's very high. Now, if I talked about some of these words, then I think you would probably begin to understand them, because the truth is, a lot of these particular words, while they look difficult, we, in many cases, many times we can think of maybe a simpler word, but the problem is we have to know it. For example, I'll do significance. Significance, you probably know as similar to this word, importance. Do we know this word, importance?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks more familiar. Yeah, so that's part of the challenge here, guys, is that, yeah, you might know like their definitions. You might know other words that mean the same thing. But the truth is, these are the kinds of words we see on a test like the TOEFL. Now, let's go to expansion for just a moment. If I told you that the original word, the root word, was expand, have you seen that word before?
Yeah.
What does it mean to expand?
Oh, wider, become wide.
Yeah, like getting bigger. Like, for example, if I put air into something, it will expand. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Or maybe if we eat too much food, right, we start to expand, right? Maybe we've been expanding during this time. Okay. What about eliminated? You might recognize that. For example, if I said eliminate, this choice, taking a test, if I said eliminate this answer, do we know, have we seen that word, eliminate?
Is that remove?
Similar, yeah, basically to get rid of something. Yeah, so yeah, when you think about taking out the garbage, right, we don't call that elimination, but it's basically you're taking things out, right? You're throwing things away. But the reason I wanted to show you some of these words is, yeah, the TOEFL, it's a higher level of reading. Now, the truth is, you might see a lot of these words in articles, newspapers, but the truth is, we probably don't use these words every day. Okay, I mean, I certainly don't say these words necessarily every day, but that's the challenge. The challenge is often our reading vocabulary needs to be bigger than our speaking vocabulary. Now, and I probably think that's probably true for you guys. Your speaking vocabulary in your language is probably not as big as your reading vocabulary is. So that's generally the truth. I mean, generally the words we use to communicate and to speak, we don't need them as many as we do when we need to read. Okay, now let's look at the next kind of vocabulary. So again, academic vocabulary, it is basically an expectation. It's a kind of a requirement that you need to learn a lot of academic words, okay? All right, now Sunny, I'm gonna go to the next screen, and Sunny, can you help us with this one? Can you read this for us, please?
Okay.
Okay, are you ready?
Technical
Technical.
technical vocabulary, also known as terminology,
Yeah, good. Terminology.
involves those words that are found in specific domains or discrete line of learning, while the TOEFL doesn't expect you to be an expert in the technical
Right, technical words.
of the subject. You definitely have to be familiar with some in order to be successful.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. Now I'm going to read this next part. Okay, so as we discussed before, we thought maybe the reading is a history article, but probably this reading might be something we would see in a different kind of book, maybe an anthropology book. Have we heard this word before? Anthropology. Do we know what an anthropologist or what anthropology means?
I heard before, but I don't remember.
Okay, well, anthro, that first part of the word anthro is referring to, or anthropos rather, is referring to humans, people. So basically anthropology is sort of like the study of human history, human civilizations. So in this case, think about in Japan, think about in Taiwan, for example, when you're in school and you study about your ancient ancestors, the people who lived, hundreds of years and thousands of years before you. We might think of that as anthropology. Anthropology is kind of a mixture of history, of human development, again, thinking about how people grow food, how people build buildings, religion. So, for example, Sonny, we mentioned, churches and things like that. Or you also might consider this like a world cultures. So again, the culture here would be thinking about Latin America, Central America, Mesoamerica. So now on the left side of the screen, let me show you some of the words that we might consider to be technical words. Now, again, technical words are words that you don't necessarily have to know, like to be successful on the test, but probably it would be helpful if you had a basic idea of them. Because again, these are the particular words that they want to see. Can you learn about what they mean? See, that's the thing. You don't have to be an expert in anthropology, but you have to be able to learn from an anthropology textbook. Well, let me show you a few of the examples. So there is one that we already looked at: religious edifices, extensive irrigation, obsidian mining, volcanic eruptions, archaeological evidence, and finally, city elite. Okay, now guys, do any of these words look familiar to you?
Only I know city.
Okay, so we know city. We probably know religious, right?
Yeah, religious.
Okay. Sunny, what about you? Any of these words look familiar?
Sandrina.
Well, as you can see, guys, again, this is just demonstrating the kind of things we're going to see on the TOEFL. So this is hopefully giving you an idea. Yeah, if I want to take a test like this, I got to keep studying. Now, keep in mind, though, some of these words might be considered more academic, but some of these are words that we would see specifically in this context. For example, let me talk about irrigation. Irrigation is something you're probably familiar with. On farms, when they have to get water out to the plants and to the crops, irrigation is the system of bringing water to those plants and to those crops. So, for example, today we have, lots of modern technology. We have, maybe watering systems, and, computers can help plan for irrigation. But, 2,000 years ago, they didn't have computers. So they had to figure out how to dig, these particular places where water would come in and then go into these fields. So, for example, irrigation is something we might talk about when we talk about agriculture. Agriculture, of course, is thinking about growing food. Well, this tells me that anthropology, the study of human civilization, actually covers lots of different topics. It covers agriculture, it covers kind of sociology. It's a pretty big topic, and of course, history too. So that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about that when we're reading on the text. Yeah, we're going to see lots of these words. Now, you don't necessarily have to be an anthropologist, but as you can see, in my opinion, the benefit here is that you would need to learn a lot of words, and it would certainly help you if you knew something about anthropology. Okay, so I'm curious, Rena and Sunny, did you guys study much about like ancient civilizations or human civilizations in your country? Did you take classes on that before?
Never.
Okay, so that's going to be a challenge, right? What about you, Rena?
Sometimes I learned, but I didn't remember
Don't remember.
anything.
Okay. Okay. Well, you actually sound like a lot of high school students anyway. So, all right. Well, let's continue. So again, the idea here is just to kind of give us an idea. All right. So studying for the TOEFL. So just to kind of finish this topic, studying for the TOEFL is much like studying for any kind of test. So that's why I'm showing you this information today. I would not recommend just walking in and trying to take the test. You need to know what's on the test. So in this case, my first piece of advice is you need to be familiar with a lot of the different topics that will be covered in a freshman level book. So thinking about, again, biology, anthropology, history, art, that's a big bunch of topics there. And you don't have to be an expert, but the truth is it helps. It helps if we know and read a lot. And we'll talk more about if you look at the second paragraph, we'll discuss more about this at the end of the presentation. What are some things we can do to improve our vocabulary? But in my opinion, this is my opinion, it will take a mixture of dedicated vocabulary learning, so studying words and studying vocabulary, as well as more knowledge about the subject matter. So again, learning more about anthropology or learning more about biology, those things would definitely help you. Now, before I leave this topic, I want to tell both of you here, I am not an expert in any of these things. In fact, when I first started teaching the TOEFL, sometimes I would have to go back and read the material 2 and 3 times to help my students. Because again, I'm not a biologist, I don't study volcanoes. I don't study these things. So in a way, I had to learn a lot too. So keep in mind, I wasn't an expert in all of these areas. I probably knew something about a lot of different things, but it's really hard to teach something when you don't really know a lot about it. So I had to go back and do a lot of reading too. So even the teachers, guys, we have to study too. Okay, now what I'd like to do is take a few minutes, just a few minutes, and show you what are the different types of questions that we see. Now, again, this is just an informational session, and again, it's only an hour. So I'm just going to kind of briefly talk about what the types of questions are on the test. Now, if you actually want to look at the reading, or look at the kinds of questions they ask, it would be a good idea to actually look at the reading, and I included that in the Google Classroom. But I want to show you real quickly, there are 10 types of questions on the test. So let me go through them kind of quickly. And again, this is from the official guide to the TOEFL. So 2 types of questions you have are called detail questions. And detail questions mean finding information. So finding facts, for example, or the second type of question is when it's called understanding a negative fact. Now you might say, what in the world is a negative fact? Does that mean it's not happy? No, what it means is often you're given choices and you have to find which one is not true. And you think that's not easy. You might have 4 choices and you have to find out which one is not the true answer. So in this case, that can be a problem. It takes time to find out what's not true. Okay, so those are called detail questions. Another type of question are called inference questions. Now, making an inference means basically making a guess. It means looking at information and then guessing what it means. So in this case, there are 2 kinds of inference questions. One, just making a general inference, like guessing from the information you're given. And then another is what's called infer rhetorical purpose. That basically means, what does the writer mean when they say something? So if the writer says something, you kind of have to guess what the writer is trying to say, okay? 5 and 6 here, these types of questions are called vocabulary and referent usage. Now, vocabulary, of course, is exactly what it means. They're going to highlight a word in the text, and you kind of have to figure out what it means. Now, of course, the best possible way to answer that question is if you know what the word means. But sometimes you have to guess, and that's a challenge. That can be a challenge. Number 6, the referent usage. Referent is referring to pronouns like he, she, it, sometimes words like that or other. So for example, when they highlight those words in a text, you have to know, well, what are they talking about? When they say he, who is he in this sentence, or who is she? Okay, and then question type 7 and 8 are called sentence level questions. Now, the sentence level questions are pretty difficult because you have to take the sentence and try to say it in a different way. So question type 7 is what we call simplifying the meaning of the sentence. And then number 8 is called the insert sentence topic. So for example, they have an extra sentence in the test, and you have to find a place to put it in the test, in the text that they've identified. That's a challenge, okay? And then finally, I mentioned that the last question type you'll see for each reading are what's called the read to learn questions. So for example, you may have to select a few answer choices to summarize information, or you actually have to complete what's called a schematic table. And that means put information into a table. Okay, now what I'm going to do here, because again our time is getting a little short, is I'm just going to show you for our reading, The Rise of Teotihuacan, I'm going to kind of go to the questions and just show you a couple of examples. Okay, so for example, in question number 1, it says in paragraph 1, so that means the first paragraph, each of the following is mentioned as a feature of the city of Teotihuacan between AD 150 and 700, except. Now, do you see that word except?
Yes.
What does that mean, except?
Oh, I know in Japanese. Not
Okay.
this.
Yeah, not but not including this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is not included. So in this case, Rena, if you think about, so let's go back for just a moment to those questions that I highlighted. If you think about it, this would be what we call the negative fact. The negative fact means I have to look at the 4 choices and find out which one is not true. This one, all of them are true except this one, okay? Now, for example, let's go back to the reading. So let me pull that up here. Okay, so for example, guys, let's look at these 4 choices. We just talked about it just a moment ago. Let's look at the 4 choices. So we said regularly arranged streets, several administration centers, many manufacturing workshops, or apartment complexes. So the truth is, we saw some of those in the text, right? You recognize some of these choices?
Yes.
Yeah, some of these look familiar, right? The question is, which one is not true? Which one does it not mention? Okay, well, let's go back for just a moment. Since we were looking at the introduction, let's go back to the introduction. Let's see if we can find out. Okay. All right, so here's what I see. So I see the apartment complexes. I see a great market. There are the workshops, right? And notice industrial. Someone mentioned industrial is like working, so we can kind of guess that. But what I notice here, do you notice what it says here? An administrative center.
Mm.
An, what does an mean?
Only one?
Only one. Now wait a minute. If I go back to the 4 choices, let's go back and look. Regularly arranged streets. Yes, we saw that.
Mm.
Several administrative centers. Did we see that?
No.
Aha. So this one looks like it may not be the answer. But here's my
Wow.
but here's my advice to you. Don't choose it. Don't choose it yet. Don't choose it at the moment. Let's look at the other 2. So did we find manufacturing workshops, plural?
Yes.
Yes, we did. And of course, manufacturing and industrial are the same word. Okay, so we saw that. And then we saw the apartment complexes.
Yes.
Yeah, there were 2,000 or so. So in this case, 3 of these we saw, but we did not see this one. So for example, that would be the answer. Now, if you noticed, that took a little time, didn't it? Yeah, it wasn't just 30 seconds. We had to really go back and look at the text, okay? Now, the idea here, and again, I'm not trying to necessarily scare us, but I'm trying to show us that these particular questions also require attention. We have to pay attention to them. Now, before we leave this topic, look at question number 2. It says the word ingenuity in paragraph 2, which we did not read, is closest in meaning to. Okay, now guys, can you guess what kind of question this one is? What do you think?
Oh. No. Ingenuity.
Well, we don't have to know the answer, or we're not looking for the answer. We're just trying to think what kind of question it is. Well, Rena, I see this, meaning. It's closest in meaning.
The word.
Yeah, the vocabulary. Yeah, it's looking for the meaning of a word. Very good, Sonny. So the idea here is if I go back to my question type, what question type is it going to be? Well, probably number 5. Yeah, it's a vocabulary question. Yeah. Now, you might say, Mr. John, I have no idea what ingenuity means. Well, of course, they probably think that you don't know this word, which means you would have to guess the word from the situation. Now, guys, we've talked a lot about collocations. So collocations would be something that might help us in thinking about the meaning of the words. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to look at every question type, but what I want to show you is the last question, just to kind of scroll down. So again, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to scroll down, so hopefully you don't get sick looking at me scrolling. Okay, so for example, if you notice question number 10, question number 10 is what we refer to as that read to learn question. Because if you notice, you have a little table here. You see the little table? Some information is missing. So if you notice, it says in the directions, an introductory sentence, right? I'm going to highlight it here. An introductory sentence for a brief summary of the passage is provided below, okay? Now, what we have to do is complete the summary by choosing 3 answer choices that express the most important ideas in the passage. Now, we didn't read the whole passage, so in this case, we can't answer the question right now. But notice we have to make a choice. So I'm gonna zoom out for just a moment. And if you notice at the bottom of the screen, we have A, B, C, D, E, and F, which means we have to take some time and look at all of those choices and decide, are they important ideas? Because we have to choose 3 of them. And again, if I count, that means there are 6 choices, 3 of them are not going to be used. So I have to find which 3 would be explaining the most important information as a summary. So notice it says some sentences do not belong in the summary because they express ideas that are not presented in the passage or are what we call minor ideas, which means not as important. Now, finally, if you notice, it says the question is worth 2 points. So the last questions that we see on each reading section are worth more points, which means you have to get it completely correct to get the 2 points. You have to get all 3 answer choices to get the 2 points. Now, don't ask me why it's only 2 points. Why not 3 points? I had to choose 3 sentences, but again, it's the TOEFL, so unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you. Okay, now guys, I just wanted to show you, just real quickly, what are the different types of questions. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is to take the last few minutes here. We may go a little longer, but just a couple of quick minutes here to show you that what are some things we need to think about when we're doing the TOEFL. So I just want to take a moment and mention to everybody that you have to be able to look at the information in different ways. For example, let's look over on the left side, skimming. Okay, Rena, could you read what skimming is for us?
Okay, skimming, looking over text quickly to get the basic idea of what you are reading. This is something you should do before reading the questions to help you locate information.
So Rena, here's the first problem. We don't have a lot of time on the TOEFL. So my advice to you is don't waste your time trying to read everything. Now, reading is different from skimming. Skimming means to look over everything very quickly. Now, the problem is it's difficult to skim if we don't understand the words. So keep in mind that skimming is something that is going to help you, but if you're skimming through the text and you say, oh my goodness, I don't understand almost all of these words, then skimming is not going to help you. In fact, the TOEFL is probably not going to be good for you right now. Now, Rena, could you read about reading? What does reading mean?
Okay. Looking over the text more carefully in order to have a deeper understanding of the information.
Okay, now read that bottom part, yeah.
Okay. Do not read the complete text at the beginning because you will not have enough time.
Now, again, guys, I'm talking about the strategy for the test. Now, of course, as you can see, we're not ready to take the test. We're definitely not ready. But just to give you an idea, reading is only something we need to do when we need to have deeper understanding. So, for example, that one question that mentioned, finding which information was not true. Remember that first question? 3 of them were true and 1 of them was not true. Well, for example, that particular type of skill would not be reading. Reading is when we need to really deeply understand something. So in this case, we probably would need to be looking for specific information. But skimming is something we do, notice what it says, we do it before. So my advice is when you first see the text in the test, we should skim the text first. That way we get a basic understanding, because the truth is, guys, the purpose of the reading on the TOEFL is to answer the questions. That's the purpose. The purpose isn't for you to remember anything, after you finish the test. So keep in mind, don't be like the guy who tried to remember the, voting in Canada. In this case, you may have forgotten everything about the city Teotihuacan. But what I'm trying to show you is skimming is something we do before we answer the questions. Reading is something we do only when we need deeper understanding. So my advice to you is don't read at the beginning. If you read, you will waste time. You will not have enough time. Okay? Now, there's another skill I want to talk about real quickly. But first, let's talk about just kind of a general strategy. So what I recommend to students is for the first 5 minutes. So when you look at a text, notice what I'm going to do. Just real quickly, I'm going through and just kind of give you the advice here. So my advice is in the first 5 minutes, you should probably read the introduction. So like what we did today is we took maybe a minute or two to read the introduction. Now, why? Well, because the introduction gives us the most important information, what this text is going to be about. Okay? Now, as we said before, while you're reading, think about the title. The title was The Rise of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan was a city. And as we looked at the introduction, we were able to guess what was the subject of this reading. Well, as we found out, not exactly history, but basically a type of history, the history of this city, which we might think of as anthropology. Okay? Now, so we read the introduction, that's good. But notice what I say next. Skim the rest of the passage. Skim all of the rest of it to get the basic idea. Because guess what? You have to get to the questions. You have to be able to read the questions. So skim the passage and then go to the questions. When you go to the questions, then you can go back and read the text when it's necessary. Okay? Now, again, that's my strategy for the first 5 minutes. Remember, you only have 20 minutes to answer all of those questions. And if you remember, there are about 12 questions sometimes, 10 questions. That's not a lot of time, okay? Now, again, we're not ready to take the test today, but I just wanted to show you that there are some basic strategies that I would recommend. So, for example, the first 5 minutes are the most important. Read the introduction, look at the title, look at the subject area. Is it history, biology? Skim the rest of the text, look at it very quickly, and then go to the questions, okay? All right, now let's continue. Now let's talk about scanning, okay? So scanning, on the other hand, is different from skimming. Skimming is something you do before you read, but scanning is when we look for specific information. So if you remember in that first question, it gave us paragraph 1. Like I said, look at paragraph 1. That means I should go to paragraph 1 and then I have to scan for information. I have to look for something specific, okay? So if you noticed, I'm starting here where it says, for example, in the detail questions, we often have to scan in a particular paragraph to locate specific information. So that's part of the idea. Scanning is something we do when we read a question. We see the question, it says, go to that text, go to that place. Now, for example, I'm just going to, again, I know our time is just about gone, but I'm going to jump for just a moment back to the reading for just for a second. And it says, look at question number 9. So we're going to look at question number 9, okay? So I'm going to leave this for just a moment. And hold on, sorry. Let's go to question number 9, just to show you. Okay. Now, if you notice in the question, it says in paragraph 1 of the passage, there is a missing sentence. Okay, now guys, this is probably the easiest question you will hear today or hear in this presentation. Which paragraph should I go to? Which paragraph should I go to? Look carefully. In paragraph 1 of the passage. So what do you think? Rena, which paragraph should I go to?
Paragraph 1.
Congratulations, you are the winner for today. So Yeah, so basically what that means is I don't read everything. I go back to paragraph 1, okay? Now, what I notice, though, is here's the nice thing that the TOEFL has done for us. In paragraph 1, they've actually given us the paragraph. You see it right there? So I don't have to go back to the text. They've included it right here. And actually, they're telling me to scan, right, to see where would I put this extra sentence. So this is that extra sentence question where I have to insert the sentence. So in this case, would I place this sentence, it's this sentence here that says, let me pull up my, sorry guys, I didn't put it on the screen. Okay, sorry. But for example, it says paragraph 1, so there it is, okay? But for example, they include the paragraph here on the screen, okay? And then this is the sentence I would have to put into the paragraph. So they give me the specific places. Is it this location here? Is it this location here? This location here? And this location here? So in this case, I have to kind of read, kind of scan for a specific place. Where do I find this information? So again, each question is going to tell you where to look. Do I look here? Do I look here? That's called scanning. And if you notice, in most of the questions, they actually help me in thinking about where to look, okay? So again, as I look at each question, so there's like, for example, question 8 says, in paragraph 6, so I should go to paragraph 6, and I should find this sentence, the thriving obsidian operation. So in this case, I go to that sentence in the text, and then I try to find out the answer to this question. And by the way, notice it says the author discusses. So that's, again, thinking about why does the author mention this word, or this expression, okay? Okay. So once again, in returning to the presentation, scanning. So scanning is when we look for specific information. So again, this is something that on the TOEFL will try to help us with. It will help us go to a specific place in the text. So once again, we have skimming, we have scanning, and then of course we have reading. So remember, don't read at the beginning. If you read at the beginning, you will be wasting your time because you're going to have to go back and read different parts of the passages again, and that's just wasting your time. Okay, now guys, again, I know we're going over our time a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight a few things before we finish here this morning. Now, you might remember last session we talked about signal words. Signal words, of course, help us understand how text is organized. So when we're reading, we see sequences like first, next, then. Academic texts love to include definitions. In fact, that's part of the purpose of the reading is can you learn new words? So we might see things like this is called, or this is known as. I think most of you are probably familiar with the next one, examples. For example, for instance, illustrated by. Over on the right side, how we change directions, however, but, on the other hand. How we continue ideas, words like also, in addition. Conclusions, in conclusion, in the end, finally, right? Cause and effect, as a result, consequence, and therefore. So again, academic reading uses lots of these signals to help organize information. So in this case, we need to also be familiar with a lot of signal words to help us understand how text is put together. Okay? All right, so guys, we're just about finished here for the morning. I want to thank you guys for joining us. So I know it's been kind of an interesting adventure, right, to see all the text. But I just want to remind you of a couple of things as we're getting here at the end. You only have about 20 minutes to look over the passage and answer the questions. So notice that's only about an average of 1.5 minutes per question. Now, I know if you sat right now and counted 1.5 minutes, you might say, oh, that seems like a long time, but not on the test. It's a lot of pressure. So that's why, once again, I'm telling you that when you're ready for the test, don't waste your time reading the passage first. Don't waste your time. You don't have a lot of time. Remember, the purpose of the test is for you to answer the questions. So the questions will help you understand the passage better. So my advice is read the passage only when it's necessary. Okay? Now again, we're only talking about test strategy. That's not something we normally do for fun, right? When you guys read, we try to understand when we read. Okay? Now, in general, to kind of get close here to the finish, vocabulary and reference questions should take less time. You should not waste a lot of time on those vocabulary questions because you either know the word or you don't. You either guess the meaning or you don't. But some of those questions, like the one we did here at the beginning, question number 1, where we found which detail was not true, that's going to take you more time, okay? And that's okay. It needs to take more time because you need to read more. And those last questions, those read to learn questions, probably will take you the most time. And it should, because it gives you more points, okay? And generally what I tell students is this, okay? So guys, you probably understand this right now. If you don't know the answer after a significant period of time, so if you're wasting time, okay, don't waste your time. Just choose an answer. Maybe close your eyes and say A, B, C, D, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Which one is it going to be? And then just choose the answer. So in this case, guys, if you don't know the answer, just guess. Don't waste your time on it, okay? All right. Now, finally, how can we improve our reading skills? Now, I'm going to include this in the TOEFL classroom, in the Google Classroom as well. But I'm just going to show you here that ETS has put together what's called the TOEFL IBT Test Planner. And I'm just going to jump ahead for just a moment. You can see here in the table of contents, so I'm going to zoom in, that it actually gives you advice for all of the sections of the test. So again, last session, of course, we talked about writing. We're going to look at the reading section. So just real quickly. So again, what I want you to think about here is there's some good advice as to how to improve our reading skills. But understand that, in my opinion, right now, for everybody in this group, we have to learn more vocabulary. So again, I want you to think about here where it says basic comprehension. It says we have to understand the general topic or main idea. We have to understand important facts and details. We have to understand the vocabulary. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. And the truth is, I'm sure Rena, Sonny, you probably don't sit around and read college textbooks every day. Do you? Do you just sit around for fun and read college textbooks?
No.
No, of course not. Nobody does that for fun. So the idea is the TOEFL test, of course, is not a fun test. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not supposed to be for fun. But that's what I just want to share with you. So again, there is some advice here in the planner that might be helpful for you. Again, here is some of the same information I gave you about the description of the section. You can read this more in detail if you are interested. But I really want to show you this last piece of advice. You can improve your reading skills by regularly reading university textbooks. Now, guys, I know textbooks are expensive. So how do we get this stuff? Well, the good news is we have the internet. So you can probably find a lot of this stuff on the internet. But Rena, Sonny, if you were studying something particular in your past, I know Rena mentioned math, for example, but if you're not very good in arts and humanities, well, guess what? You probably should read more arts and humanities. If you're not very good in the sciences, like me, I should read more about sciences. But that's the idea. Okay, so my advice is if you want some more suggestions, this little planner can give you some good advice, but that's probably the most important one that I can give you. Okay? Okay, well, guys.